Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the URA. I'm Kelvin Ang, and it's my pleasure to present the very first talk of the year with regards to conservation on behalf of the Urban Redevelopment Authority and, of course, the NUS Architectural Restoration Laboratory and the Commonwealth Heritage Forum. So why do I mention all three names? Because this is a very important day for us. It's the first time that in Singapore we've had the privilege of working with NUS, who is now the proud custodian of 141 New Road, whom we've not visited before. It's a latest addition to the heritage assets that we have in this country that is for the purpose of training up a new generation of specialists at all levels. That's our ambition, to be able to restore, conserve, and sustain our built heritage. It doesn't happen by magic, as you all know, so we need to train, right? And of course, this house was very generously donated by the Portabella family and at 141 New Road, and was opened late last year by our Minister for National Development, Desmond Lee, as a training center. And of course, we have our two speakers from the UK here. They are here invited by Arc Lab to do a workshop with the locals, but also they are here because we've generously received support from the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, recently set up, and this forum is in place to bring together the peoples of the Commonwealth through a shared understanding of our heritage, the tangible, the history, etc., so that we are also able to, I would say, grow more closer together. And a key function or the key objective of the forum is to, again, train up a new generation of skilled craftspeople to sustain and maintain. And in this training effort, we are very fortunate to have received the generous support of the Hamish Oxon Foundation, who has donated a substantial amount to the forum to support training across the Commonwealth as part of the Commonwealth Heritage Skills Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee Training Program. So that is why we are all here. But the point of today is to hear from our two key speakers from York. I have to admit that even though I studied for quite a few years in the UK, I have never made it to York because as a student on a very modest stipend, train tickets and accommodation were not so affordable. I may have made it to York, but I'm not sure I could have stayed overnight in the city because it's very, very beautiful. Okay. So that is why I'm very excited, because now the two speakers are here to share with us what they do in the UK with regards to training up the next generation. So without further ado, because I know you've read all the CVs, etc., I hand over to Laura and Lee to share today. And just to share further, if some of your friends have missed up the chance to be here today, not to worry. We are videoing the session so that it can be put online later for ongoing reference. So we hope to be able to build up a good online resource for the industry. So thank you very much for your attendance today, and let us welcome our guests from the UK.
Hello everybody, my name's Laura Cotter, and along with my colleague Lee Godfrey, we're very pleased to be here. Thank you for that very kind introduction. So I'm Research and Partnerships Manager for York Minster Fund, which works alongside York Minster, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And Lee is Lead Mason and Conservator, who's going to give you a really interesting account of his 33 years of experience. Obviously, we're here in Singapore at the moment, but we're on a little tour for about 17 days. So Singapore first, and then we move on to Hong Kong, and then Bangkok, and then on to Mumbai, where we'll be visiting the Afghan church and looking at some of the restoration work they're also doing there. And we're sharing this presentation at each of the locations. So welcome today. I'm going to hand over to Lee, who's going to speak first, and then hand back to myself, and then Lee will conclude. I've got a big stack of business cards here, which I'm going to leave. And if anybody wants to contact either of us, if you pick up one of my business cards, that's the way to contact Lee also. So please help yourself at the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions at the end, that'd be wonderful as well. So I'm going to hand over to Lee, who's going to start. Thank you.
Hello, yes, my name's Lee Godfrey. Basically, this presentation is about how York Minster is looking out to the world and in search of people and places which will ensure the significance of York Minster will be conserved for past, present and future generations. York Minster is one of England's greatest Gothic buildings. The Minster which we can see today was built between 1225 to 1472 and is built in a variety of Gothic styles. The magnesium limestone it's made from is a blessing and a curse at the same time, which I'll lead on to in the rest of the talk, but it's principally the reason for the beauty of the Minster and also its size. I've lost the cursor. Sorry, this one. Sorry about that. The Minster is of exceptional heritage significance with a number of associated values. It's the largest Gothic building in Britain and has archaeology that goes back to the Roman period. As such, it tells the social religious story of Christianity in England. The Minster houses some of the most significant pieces of stained glass in Britain, but the building's principal function is a place of worship and learning. And the building is also a symbol of York and the county of Yorkshire, which draws in around 1 million visitors a year. It is often said that the history of York is the history of England. York Minster is also famous for its stone yard, which is of national importance in the training of stonemasonry and stained glass conservators. My journey in the world of conservation started in 1989 when I was fortunate enough to be trained by Geoffrey Butler, who was the master carver. Under his guidance, I'd studied the form of York Minster. Within this time, I also attended York College and gained City and Guilds craft and advanced craft certificates in stonemasonry. The training I received from Jeff is probably the most valuable and enjoyable time of my career, as Jeff not only taught me how to carve, he also taught me how to observe the building for inspiration and reference. And I learned what I believe is the most important aspect of conservation, the passing on of knowledge and craft skills to the next generation. In my case, Jeff told me that he was trained by George Hooby, who was one of York's most famous carvers. He was trained under George Milburn, which you can see in the blue plaque there. After the apprenticeship, I spent a decade producing carving for York Minster. Here are a picture of a few carvings that I produced in this period. However, it's not all of them. Some of the stones could take up to 2 months, whilst others were repeated multiple times. During this period, I began to look at the stones as weathered reflections of the past, which I used in the present to carve new reflections for future carvers to see, so that they could see the original form of the building. Perhaps the most magical part of the process is being given magnesium limestone that is over 230 million years old to carve with your hands and mind to adorn York Minster. Stones which may last up to 500 years on the building. This is an incredibly precious experience and is the thing that I'm most conscious of passing on to the apprentices. During this period, however, the major project was the restoration of the Great West Doorway. The restoration of the 13th century Great West Doorway of the Minster remains a turning point in my career and outlook as a carver. Much to my dismay, the decision was made to completely replace the original doorway. The decision was made that the new figurative carving would be sculpted in a modern dynamic line rather than copying the original Gothic, which I adored. The principal justification for replacement was to preserve what remained of the original doorway inside the building, away from the elements, whilst the restoration would allow the doorway to function again as the main ceremonial entrance into the cathedral without damage to the public. To this end, a sculptor named Rory Young was commissioned to produce a new set of figurative carvings, whilst the foliage and canopies would be carved in the traditional way. For 2 years, 7 carvers and 10 masons worked on the doorway and produced new figurative carving and foliage of incredible beauty. Although I remain very appreciative of the new design, which enabled me to produce some of my best carving, I still remain unhappy about the replacement of the entire doorway. It was much against what I'd been taught and believed. Later restorations, in my mind, are as much part of the history of the Minster as the original stones. The original stones, although safely stored in the crypt, could no longer be seen by the public. So to me, the stone mirrors could no longer reflect the biblical message to future generations, which they were made for. My feelings were so strong that for many years afterwards, I avoided going to the West End of the Minster. However, it was Rory Young, the sculptor of the new design, who offered me a craft lifeline. After attending Rory's lecture on the use of lime, I was made aware that there are other options besides replacement. I decided to seek more information on conservation courses, which eventually resulted in me embarking on the William Morris Craft Fellowship in the year 2000. For 9 months, I was privileged to travel the length of Britain, visiting sites of historical significance, learning new craft skills, and the SPAB's philosophy of repair, which was based around the SPAB manifesto written by William Morris in 1877. I met like-minded craftspeople and learned about the importance of debate and the concepts of minimal intervention and honest repair. However, as I absorbed this thinking, I was steadily distanced from my chosen craft of carving. By the time I returned to the Minster, I decided the only way to reconcile this personal conflict was to stop carving altogether and instead concentrate on repair in situ. Here in this side we see the lime method. The lime method repairs stonework using lime mortar, sand and stone dust. And here is an example of, you can see, in the top left you can see an example of the state of the original stone, whilst in the right hand side you can see a stone which has been repaired with lime. In the process, the black sulphation is cleaned away and then the stone is repaired with lime, and at the final part of the process a shelter coat is applied. As well as mortar repairs, it is common for decorative stones to require pinning where cracks and faults threaten the integrity of the stone. Here the canopy is prepared for pinning and mortar repairs. Holes are drilled out and threaded stainless steel or basalt rods are fed and anchored into the repairs using hydraulic lime or resin. Ceramic T-bars are also used to anchor substantial mortar repairs, which can be seen on the right-hand side. After repair, a record sheet of all the interventions are made. This is perhaps the most important part of the whole process, as it will help inform future craftspeople on what was done to the stone and when. If the repairs are successful, they can be repeated. Likewise, if they fail, conservators will know what not to do. Newly appointed the Minster's conservator, I was asked if I would like to enhance my conservation knowledge by undertaking an MA in Conservation Studies at the University of York. Although I was apprehensive about the shift into academic studies, I took up the challenge and successfully completed the degree with distinction in 2005, even though I'm nervous now. Throughout the course, I revisited my past conflicts and found much resolve in the process. Importantly, I was able to question both aspects of my earlier training and developed a greater understanding of the importance of defining the history and significance of a building or place. As a result, I realised that neither full restoration nor total material conservation were desirable. Many people perceive conservation as keeping everything with purely practical solutions. However, I came to understand that the practical solutions are just the final element of an informed process. The process also made me feel confident to carve again, as well as conserving with the lime method. Basically, the time at King's Manor added new tools to my kit, namely research, recording, and an awareness of conservation charters. Interestingly, in the slide, in the top left-hand corner, you can see Nikhil Joshi and also Rory Young, the designer of the Great West Doorway. Consequently, with the new tools of heritage charters, I faced a reflection of the West Doorway. At the opposite end of the Minster is the Great East Window, surrounded by a set of figurative carvings in a similar state of decay to those of the West Door. The East Window is the most significant stained glass window in the Minster and possibly Britain. It is often referred to as the English masterpiece. The glass was painted by John Thornton between 1405 and 1408 and is the depiction of the Bible from beginning to end. And in the very top is the most famous opening where God holds a book proclaiming that I am the Alpha and Omega, which basically translates that God is the beginning and end of all things. Understandably, at the time, much significance in research was placed on the glazing. However, little was understood about the stone-carved voussoirs and the seated figure surmounting it. Consequently, as part of my MA at King's Manor, I undertook a dissertation on the meaning of the East Front. However, there was little information to go on. I can remember thinking, how on earth is a simple stone carver like me going to work out what these carvings represent? Thinking about conservation training, I realised I needed to base my research on heritage charters. And here I found the Borough Charter's recommendation to research associated meanings of the place was key to unlocking the meaning. So after many days and hours of reading the Bible and studying the carvings and stained glass of European cathedrals, my research evolved into one which revealed an important relationship between the stone of the glass and the glass, which my drawings naively represent. And finally, the research led to an acknowledgement that the carvings are of international significance and led to a change in the repair strategy of the Minster. So here we can see that the kings of Judah, basically the research revealed that these are the kings of Judah. Under the kings is their symbol, the form of a lion mask, whilst in the foliage, here's a seated figure above, and then that's the apex where God holds the book saying, I am the Alpha and Omega. And basically the voussoir carvings moved down. Basically, the east window to the medieval mind was a portal into heaven. Perhaps this is the proudest part, the best piece of the research. Here are the repair proposals for the stonework of the east front. The drawing on the left presents the worst case scenario. The red indicates areas for replacement, and as you can see, the Great East Window was to be completely dismantled and most of the medieval tracery replaced. However, owing to the further research and a new architect, the use of modern repair mortars, the proposal was significantly altered. Due to the significance of the voussoir stones, a detailed record was made of their condition. Pre-conservation, each stone was surveyed and all defects were recorded. Then all repair mortars and interventions were recorded by the mason conservators in a notebook which was then input into the record sheet. This again will give future conservators an informed understanding of how to best conserve the carvings. We did not have the information in 2005. It would have been invaluable if we had had this at the time. On a personal reflection, the use of the Borough Charter had reconciled my experience of the whole replacement of the West Doorway. Education and training enabled me to voice my feelings and beliefs in a scientific way. I was able to carve again. In a period inspired by the meaning of the east window, my carvings were embellished with stories and meanings associated to the window and my research. The voussoir figures themselves inspired the form and scale of the figure in the centre, which is King Uzziah, while on the side of it you can see he's holding a shield that represents that he's a king of Judah. And then also that there is my interpretation of the Jesse tree. I'm going to hand you over to Laura now.
Thank you, Lee. So, as I said earlier, I actually don't work for York Minster. I work for York Minster Fund, and when I started with York Minster 5 years ago, I actually knew nothing about stone and glass. I'm actually an engineer. I'm a manufacturing engineer, and I was brought in to look at stone and glass conservation and repair work with completely fresh eyes, and to look at the processes with an impartial view and come up with some suggestions of what they could do, what they could introduce, how they could change, how other people working in the world. And the kind of challenges that York Minster was facing came under really 3 categories, so environmental, financial and heritage skills. I think this has gone to sleep. There we go. So from a financial perspective, it's changing there, but not here. There we go. Thank you. Thanks, John. So from a financial perspective, it costs roughly about £30,000, or I did a conversion this morning, it came out as around 50,000 Singapore dollars a day to run York Minster. That's such a significant number. I don't think people realise how much it costs to run a building of that size. We get no government funding, no income from the Church of England. The majority of it comes from people actually paying to come through the door, or maybe from the shop, or we've got some properties that we can rent out. So we have got other funding streams. In 2019, we received around about 150,000 visitors, and then obviously what happened in 2020, it was more like 200,000. That was really in the first couple of months before we went into a lockdown situation. So the loss of income was absolutely catastrophic. We had to look at a more sustainable business model and how we could use the campus as a whole. Now, I'm not going to go into everything that we're doing, I'll touch on it slightly, but we have just opened a brand new refectory, so a lovely restaurant right overlooking the Minster with a beautiful menu. Lee and I are looking forward to trying when we get back. It looks very swish. We're looking at a new ticketing office to try and encourage people. We've got plans for a new museum. We're looking at how we can use all the properties on the site and really maximise the value of the whole plot of land that York Minster owns. The fabric costs, so the work that Lee and his colleagues do, it costs roughly about £11 million over 5 years, and the capital projects that are going to fund all this extra income are around about £14.5 million. So there's a huge amount of money we're talking about in terms of York Minster, lots of pressure from a financial point of view. And then environmentally, you can see some of the pictures here of worn stone, and as we get increasing rainfalls due to global warming and the pollution that we face as well, we're just seeing drastic stone erosion. So it was interesting, when I first started at York Minster, I was told, and you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but I was told that they'll put the scaffolding up, and at that point we'll decide if they're going to work on it, if they think it needs to be repaired in the next 70 to 100 years, because it can take that long before they get round to that area again. So it's a constant programme of works that isn't going to stop. So anything we can do to increase the productivity and get round the building quicker and deal with these situations, the better. And then we have an issue with heritage craft skills in the UK. So there's 42 Anglican cathedrals, only 10 have their own working stone yards. It's a very expensive process because it's traditional, it's slow, it uses hand tools. I went to a stone yard in Germany at Cologne Cathedral where they're using air tools, and when I explained that they use hand tools at York Minster, he thought it was really romantic. And we love the romance of it. That is really important, is the romance of it. But there's only 10 stone yards left. And so that is not sustainable. So we had to find a way to ensure that that craft skill and romance was kept for future generations, but had the longevity as well for future generations. So we really do have a shortage of trained craftspeople. We take on at least one new apprentice at York Minster every year, which is a 4-year programme. So we're really invested in retraining new people, and now we're really invested in knowledge transfer. There's been a lot of knowledge transfer with cathedrals in the UK, with those 10 that have their own stone yards, but through the project that I've been working on, it's about exactly what we're doing today, coming and talking to people in other countries, in other continents, and saying, this is what we're doing, what are you doing, what can we share, what can we learn from each other? So we knew that we wanted to invest in some modern technology, which was quite shocking when I came in as an engineer and started talking about CNC machining centres. I think Lee was about the only stonemason who'd actually speak to me at one point. And I think they even stopped talking to Lee at one point. But we're getting there now. So our facilities were constrained. There isn't a huge amount of room for people and for machines. So we had to relook at the site as well from that perspective. And another constraint is we're working on a project to protect all the medieval glass. It's the largest collection of medieval glass, I believe, in the world. Is that? Yeah. Because it was protected during the World Wars, during the significant periods where a lot of stained glass was damaged. York Minster was protected. It's now at risk of being damaged by the environment, and there's now a programme which was originally about a 20-year programme to conserve the glass. It's taken that long to get around it. It's now looking at more like 30 years at its current pace. And that's not because people aren't working hard. It's because every time they go up to a window and they expect to do repair work, they're finding that they're having to do either much more significant repair work to the stone or actually replace it. So it's not necessarily the glass that's the issue, it's the stone, and we've seen some of the environmental damage. So at that pace, it's just not sustainable. So those are the real priorities that we're pushing for something at York Minster to change. So as I said, I report into York Minster Fund. York Minster Fund is a separate charity which was established in 1967. So basically, York Minster, you saw those videos earlier, it's got this amazing tower, 197 feet high, 25,000 tonnes. It was sinking. When they surveyed it that year, they found it was sinking because of the foundations. The clergy were not spending money significantly enough on the restoration work, so the York Minster Fund was set up by prominent local business people to find the money to protect the tower before it fell. And they did. If you go to York Minster now and you go down into the undercroft, you'll see not only a museum, but the actual works, the engineering works that underpins that central tower. And that fund has continued. So for the last 50 years, it's continued to raise money, and it provides around about £1 million per year for conservation and restoration work, focused predominantly on stone and glass. But we have recently had a big programme to restore the organ as well. And it does support education and music and learning. So I was engaged in May 2018. It was a 2-year project So if anyone could do the maths, I'm still there 5 years later, and it doesn't look like I'm going anywhere just yet. So I was, like I said, asked to look for best practice, go out in the world and see what everyone else is doing and see what we can learn from it. Look for new techniques, look for new technologies, maybe in engineering, in construction. How could we bring these new skills into the historic skill base? So not bring new people in, not bring engineers in, but actually hand these new skills and new techniques and new technologies over to the team that we've already got. So increase their understanding and their abilities into a different area. And how can we do that to increase conservation, which I've already explained. So I spent a good few months actually with the team, gave them some trust, understanding from their perspective, ideas that they had, and we really focused on 4 main areas. So measurement and documentation, cutting technology, handling equipment, and project management. So from a knowledge sharing point of view, the top 4 are the ones that we've really worked with the most. So Washington Cathedral in the USA, Milan Cathedral in Italy, Cologne in Germany, and Nidaros in Norway. And not only have they become partners, but they've actually become really good friends now, and we share quite often we share knowledge with each other and techniques and understanding. And then some examples of some of the research that I've done. So Marmamak is the biggest stone show in the world, which is in Italy. We've got advanced engineering, so we've gone to engineering and construction exhibitions, and our apprentices are going to an advanced engineering exhibition in a couple of months in the UK. For a stonemason to be able to get the opportunity to go to an advanced engineering exhibition and look at advanced engineering technology, we don't even mind if there's not something there we're going to apply. It's just about looking out and thinking outside the box and just having that little thing that sparks an idea in them. Denkmal, which is in Germany, which is a conservation exhibition, and from that they actually invited me to Shanghai, where I presented about the project in 2019. So really getting out far and wide, and again I'll be able to add this in for the next time I do the presentation. So some of the things that we've introduced, we came across a Proliner. This was at an exhibition in Italy. This is mainly used for, if you look at the top left photo, for measuring worktops, for kitchen counter worktops. And we saw it and thought, this is interesting. I'd spent some time with the glaziers. The bottom right-hand picture is the glaziers actually measuring the tracery windows to be able to frame new protective glazing and also reframe the medieval glass. And they were using a historic way of doing it, pushing this paper in, incredibly slow process. And even they said there must be a better way of doing this. So when we saw this piece of technology, and we brought the company over from Belgium to trial it, and you can see there an example of a tracery window that's been drawn. And the more the team have got used to using it, the more ways they've found of getting the best out of it. So, for example, on a typical 25 tracery panel window, what would have taken 10 days to template, they're able to now do in roughly about 2 days, so an 80% saving, so really significant. It's the same people doing it, they're just doing it in a modern way. We've looked at photogrammetry, so I came across this at Nidaros Cathedral in Norway, where they were using it for recording. We really liked it, so the masons at the time were only taking photographs. So we've now purchased a really good camera, and we've purchased the software, and photogrammetry is now available for the masons to use if they choose to record in that way. And that's the capital that Lee, you've got to show it later, I think you're talking about. Lee will tell you a little bit more about that later. 3D scanning, we started doing trials back in 2019. It was too early for the masons. Photogrammetry was brilliant. They could pick up a camera, they could take photos, they could go to a computer, run them through, and they got this 3D image. Picking up a scanner was a totally new skill, and at the time, 2019, whilst we were all excited about it, it just felt like it was too soon. And this project's been about taking little steps and taking people on a journey rather than trying to introduce everything really quickly. So we had various companies come in and do trials, and since then we've actually purchased a Creaform Go Scan last year, and this is an example of one of the grotesques on the Minster, and we've now got a programme of recording as much as we can while the scaffolding is on the south side before it comes down. And as we move around, we'll continue to record. We've got to be clever about this and not try and scan everything, because again, it creates a huge amount of data. And then we have another problem. How do we store this data? Where do we store this data? How do we ensure, like Lee said, if they knew things about the Great East Window when they were conserving it 10 years ago, it would have been really helpful. But in 100 years' time, when they come to do it again, if we've scanned it, is that technology going to be accessible? It's all moving so fast. So some of the decisions we're having to start thinking about and making. We also looked at cutting technology. I touched on that earlier. So Lee and I actually travelled to Italy a number of times in 2019, where we looked at some really significant 5-axis cutting technology. And we did 2 trials, a voussoir and a finial. So there's some numbers up there, just to give an example of the kind of opportunities we saw with this kind of technology. So to do the voussoir on the left by hand was roughly about 4 days. With technology using a 2D CAD model, it took 2 hours to program the machine, 4 hours to machine it, leaving 2 millimeters of material, and then 2 days to take that last 2 millimeters off by hand. So even doing it that way, we still saw a 30% saving. And over a set of 52, that's potentially a 75-day saving. On the finial, they always come in sets of 3. So one of the masons did the first one completely by hand, which was 29 days. We then 3D scanned it, and using that scan, it took 2 days to program the machine, 2 days to cut it to 2 millimeters, and 16 days to hand finish it, because there's quite a lot of intricate work there. So that was a 31% saving, but as I said, these come in sets of 3. So on the third one, you wouldn't need that 2 days programming again, because you can use the same program. So overall, across a set of 3, it was roughly about a 20-day saving. So we've actually taken that further than 2 mil now. We've started investigating whether we can get closer and take more material off, which actually, in some ways, is better for the masons, because at 2 millimeters, you've still got quite a lot of material, and trying to find your reference points, especially on the intricate detail, can be really tricky. So I said that we were investing in cutting technology. We're actually investing £650,000 in cutting technology. 2 very large machining centres, probably going to be the largest Z-axis ones working in a stone yard in the UK. So we've got a Breton Contour 5 and a Breton Speed X, which is the next picture I'll show you. So the Contour 5 is a milling machine, so it can use a small blade. It can go from a milling piece this big right down to a milling end like a pen, so we can really get into the detail and take as much material off as we want to. These machines will be going into the new Centre of Excellence, which I'll show you some pictures of shortly, and they should be commissioned in Q1 and ready to use in Q2. We've been told that these kind of machines, once you have them, can take 6 to 12 months before you know really how to make them work. Well, we've got the time now, so we found a stone yard in Wales that we're actually working with, and Lee, along with 3 other stonemasons, are being trained to use this machine now, so that when we have ours ready, they're good to go. You know, they know how to use them, they know how to program them, and we can start straight from the doors opening, basically. So that's the second one. This is more of a large blade machine for cutting and taking larger pieces off. And then the third machine we're investing in is a little piece of kit that we saw in Italy. It's an MD Dario. And you might look at this and think, gosh, that's so different to the other 2. Why go for something like this? Part of the Centre of Excellence is about education, and like I talked about, that journey of steps through. So at the moment, the masons are using hand tools, and they had an old bridge saw. This is a hand-operated saw. So whilst it's not a big machining centre that someone's going to program from a computer, they can hold that handle and basically move the machine and make it do what they want it to do. So for me, it's a step towards higher grade machines, but it's still something that a mason would control. So it's taken them on that journey, especially after their apprenticeship. Another thing we've looked at is the casting process. So these were some pictures that Lee took for me. This was to create a replica of a weathered medieval grotesque. It had actually lost its head, so you can see on the right-hand picture, Lee's holding two pieces, but he's cast this directly off the weathered grotesque, which is a really invasive process. It also took 7 days to create the mould. So we said, you know, is there a quicker way, less invasive way of doing this? So we looked at 3D scanning the two pieces, joining them together digitally, and then machining them in polyurethanes. The polyurethane is a modelling material that's used in car manufacture, and it worked really well for creating the image on the right, creating a replica, and it saved around about 40% of the time. It took 4 days instead of 7, and it was non-invasive as well, so there was no additional damage to the medieval grotesque. That's Lee there holding it side by side with the one actually on the minster up on the scaffold, so you can see it's a really good replica. And then we passed it to another mason who used it to design a brand new grotesque, but based on the original shape of what was there. So this is his design that he did, and now this is stood outside the minster ready to go on at some point, I think later this year or early next year. So I mentioned the Centre of Excellence. You can see the minster there in its the land that you can see is predominantly owned by the minster, and the two red shaded areas are effectively our new campus facility as a Centre of Excellence. So we have a heritage quad. This is an image looking down from the York City walls. If anyone's been to York, we've got these wonderful walls that go all the way around. And the idea is that as the general public walk the city walls, they'll be able to look down into the heritage quad where the masons will be working with hand tools and be able to see what's happening, whereas it can be quite hidden away at times. It's an £8.5 million project, so it's quite significant, all funded by York Minster Fund. And hopefully we've got a little video that... Thank you. This is a little video that our architects of Tonkin Lou, who are based in London, have put together for us to give an idea of what this heritage quad is going to look like. So this area on the right that you're looking at here is actually accommodation for 6 people. We're going to provide accommodation for our first and second year apprentices, and also have 2 spare accommodation available for people to visit on an exchange basis. So with the partners that we're already working with, we're talking to them about doing short exchanges with their team to share a deeper knowledge of people actually being able to work within the team at our site and at their site, and provide the expensive yacht accommodation. This is representational of the bankers where the masons will work. Loads of really nice light. There's the constant view up, so you're still engaging with the minster itself for the inspiration. So the building of this is going to be starting literally in the next couple of months. It's all approved, the costs are approved. We're just appointing the main contractor now. So it's down to 2. I think final interviews are imminent. And there you can see the minster back up there. Thank you. And that's available on YouTube if anybody wants to share it. So a brand new workshop, like I said, for 15 stone masons. That's a view from the top, looking down. So really, it's in a garden, so trying to make it look as if it fits in, especially where it's so in such close proximity to Minster. That's the accommodation. And then the other site is going to be focused on technology. So it's a big open area to house the new machining centres, covered in PV. So as you know, it's going to do water collection and use the sunlight for energy. And there you can see what representation of what the machines are going to look like inside. So that's sort of our future, opening in 2024. And all this has come together really in a really significant project that happened last year. So in 2020 was commissioned a statue of Queen Elizabeth II, which was for the Platinum Jubilee, and should have been unveiled in September 2022. And sadly, she died about 2 weeks before we were due to unveil it. So obviously, out of respect, that got cancelled. And King Charles III came in November 2022 to unveil a statue. It has now become the first statue to be unveiled post her death. But for us, it's really become also this interplay of craft skills and technology working together and how we envisage it for the future. So this is a small clay model that Richard Bossons, our carver who produced the statue, he produced this small model first for approval. So all done by hand in clay, which was then 3D scanned using so bringing technology into that. The scan was scaled up to around just almost 7 foot, and using the polyurethane material, we cut a full-size model. What this allowed us to do is lift it up into the niche where it was due to be unveiled and actually look at the sizing, the shape, how it fitted in the niche much earlier than we would have been able to do. So again, bring that technology element in. Richard then used the polyurethane model to build the full-size model on top of. So the polyurethane is in there with clay and plaster on top of it. And so it saved him the time of having to create that original shape. He could really go on to the embellishment of it, and it's absolutely beautiful. He did a fantastic job. And that's Richard 3D scanning his own model as well. We used photogrammetry to record it. So all these technologies that I've shown you that we've used in this specific project. And then we use CNC to actually machine the final piece in stone. It took 3 weeks, and whereas before with the trials we machined it to 2 millimeters, we actually took the decision to mill it to 1/2 mil, and that was something that was led by Richard the carver. We gave him free rein on that. He tried it at 2 millimeters first and found out it just didn't, the features weren't defined enough for him to finish it, so he asked to try it 1.5 mil, and then 1 mil, and he settled himself on 1/2 mil, which was a huge breakthrough, really. This isn't my music, but it's very moving. No, I kind of like it though. It kind of fits. So you can see here the model on the right-hand side is a polyurethane with the clay and plaster over the top of it that was 3D scanned. The one on the left has come straight off the machine and had nothing done to it. And then he spent quite a few months still to finish it, to take that last 1/2 mil off. But we think in total it saved months, probably 2 to 3 months worth of work. So there's King Charles unveiling it in November. And I'm close up, which is so beautiful. And actually I had the privilege of meeting him, and we presented him with a 3D printed model of the statue as well. So again, bringing some technology into that interaction. So what's next? The next things that we're looking at is digital sculpting. So we've got ZBrush, which we're trialing. Lee's been spending quite a bit of time on it at the moment. So this is a monastery in Wyoming that we went to visit in September. They're building a brand new Gothic church, and none of them are stonemasons. They're self-taught, and they design everything digitally. So it was really nice to see this, and it's something that we've taken away and are playing with first before we decide how far we're going to take it. We've looked at 3D printing in stone. So we've really liked the idea of 3D printing, and it was actually a stonemason who came to me and said, I think we could use 3D printing for repairs. And we were looking at whether we could print moulds to pour gypsum for small repairs. And whilst in an exhibition in Lyon in France, we found a 3D printing machine that can actually print in stone. They currently print in sandstone and in clay, but we've approached them and said, could we design a mix of grinding our magnesium limestone, mixing it with a binder, and actually printing in our own stone? So we're just getting costings to be able to look at that and take that forward. So that's quite exciting. And this is their video of an example that's been used before. And then we're also looking at how we can work on site quicker. So if we can produce a stone quicker, we've got to be able to fix it quicker, put it back up quicker. Otherwise, we're just going to have lots of stone sat around us. So that's going to become the next bottleneck very quickly. And we're addressing that now rather than waiting until it becomes an issue. So we're starting to look at modern scaffolding opportunities, lifting equipment on site, how we can work in a wider range of the year, maybe by protecting the scaffolding more and keeping the heat there, when the temperatures drop for us. So I'm always told if we want to be a world-class centre of excellence, we must talk to the world. So we've got NUS on there in the bottom right corner, but these are some of the people that we're already starting to talk to, and we're really open to any ideas or suggestions. If anybody sees something, I would love them to drop me an email and say, Laura, this might be really interesting for your project. It might come of nothing, it might be something we implement, but if you do come across, even in a year or two's time, I'd really appreciate you dropping us an email, and you're very welcome as well to come to York and see the Minster and have a tour. So I'm going to hand back to Lee for the final part of his talk, and then we'll be open to questions.
Yeah, the next slide.
That's it. That was it. So you just need to click it. That one. And just go on to the next slide.
Okay, so
That was good.
Thank you.
Okay, I've stopped shaking now, so we can have the second part of the talk. It's probably the bit that I was most apprehensive about anyway, but here we go. 2008 brought perhaps the most interesting period of change to the stone yard. Richard Shaw, you just saw with the picture with the King, the head of York Minster Fund, gave a talk in the stone yard and said that it was his intention and the fund's intention to research technology and principally CNC source to produce new stones and conserve the fabric of York Minster. This raised a number of debates in the stone yard, with many masons fearing the craft traditions of using hand tools would be lost. Many masons would argue that what about conserving the art and craft of stonemasonry? And as the Minster's conservator, everyone expected me to be the most vocal in the opposition of technology. However, it was my training as a conservator that made me think the opposite. And as normal, looking at the Borough Charter, with its scientific approach to managing change, I found the answer was, again, to research associated meanings of the place. But perhaps the most interesting part of it for me was that I actually looked up what the word technology meant and found with great delight a description of the art and craft of stonemasonry. The word technology comes from two Greek words translated techne and logos. Techne means art, skill and craft, whereas logos means the utterance by which inward thought is expressed, a saying or an expression. This is probably what most craftsmen spend their day in doing, in this deep reflection. York Minster, in an inspired process of looking to the future, also employed Laura Cotter to research and develop the use of technology. Laura's job was to research and make connections across England, Europe, and much to my amazement, the whole of the world, to find technology that would best produce and conserve masonry for the fabric of York Minster. To me, this is conservation advocated by the Borough Charter, research of associated meanings of the place to define significance and values to give an informed understanding of how best to manage change. My professional life has also been enhanced by this process of engaging with technology. I have been fortunate enough to meet masons in Germany and live a dream of meeting masons in Milan, monks in America who send me emails asking advice about masonry, and I respond by asking questions about their technology. Apart from the building professional relationships, the visits have already managed the change at York Minster. In a talk about the visit to Milan, it was the slide on the right which gave the idea to Alex McClellan, the principal manager of the Minster, to build a new workshop with accommodation at York. As part of the process, we've discovered 2 new materials that have helped us in the repair of the Minster. Whilst on a visit to Venice, a conservator named Paolo Pagnin introduced us to basalt, a material which we now use to reinforce mortar repairs. As I mentioned earlier, the pins and mesh are made from extruded basalt rock. Basalt is stronger than steel whilst having the same thermal movement as limestone. The principal advantage of basalt is that it will not rust or expand like steel or brass armatures used in the past. And due to its strength and resistance to rust, basalt is used as reinforcement in concrete structures, including dams. Due to this factors, basalt is the perfect material to reinforce mortar repairs on the Minster. I was quite anxious about showing this video, but Nikhil's not here, so I feel less so at the moment. This is another material called Saint One that we were introduced to on a visit to a stone fair in London. But for me, it's really good because you can see on the left-hand side, the stained glass has been removed, but we were able to repair both of these stones. If we'd not used the Saint One repair with mortar, that material would have had to be removed. So in my mind, it's a very good advancement. And then the other thing is I often get asked, what's your favourite piece of work on the Minster? And I can honestly say that this mortar repair to a label stop is that. Despite carving Rory Young's Great West Doorway and having an opportunity to carve numerous grotesques, the fact I was able to save this stone I found greatly pleasing. It's of structural importance, so you can see on the right-hand side, that's the stone after repair. But all of these new materials that we've been given, I've been able to use in a craft way. The main problem was that the crockets, if you see the foliage on the right-hand side, most of the water was running down the building and then dripping off the features of the nose. If I'd have used a traditional lime repair, it would probably have lasted about 20-25 years, whereas the Minster's protocol is that we have to leave a stone for at least 100 years to manage that. But we've got a very forward-looking architect and a master mason, and they both asked me if I felt that I could repair this stone. And using stainless steel, ceramic T-bars, the base coat is grund, I was able to build this model up and carve features into it, but still, following my SPAB philosophy, I think it's an honest repair. But yeah, it's the one that gives me most pleasure. So if we're going back to the whole concept of technology and how it's going to affect us at the Minster, I often look at the Minster and think, what is there that we do at the moment that an original medieval mason would recognise? And I think basically the only thing that they would is that we use hand tools, a chisel and a mallet. Everything else, from the quarrying, the transportation, even the mallet now is a plastic tool. Originally, they would have used stainless steel tools. Everything's completely changed. And, you know, constantly I see masons, apprentices are on mobile phones, picking up images and using that as their inspiration for their work. So with this in mind, you look at the picture of the medieval setting out room in the roof space of the Minster and think, what would the original masons produce with computer-aided drawing and 3D laser scanning? The medieval masons and early restoration masons used squares and dividers and scribed their designs directly into the plaster floor before transferring them to the stone. Since the Minster was completed in 1472, masons have been copying the original design. To do this, the master mason has devised ways of measuring the building produced templates. So here you can see stone templates, zinc templates, and then now 2003, we've moved on to computer-aided design, if I could say it. Same principles and purposes, just different media, all informed by measurement of the original masonry. The laser scanner, this slide I'm going to talk about the laser scanner. The laser scanner is a measuring tool which is accurate to 0.05 of a millimetre. This will record the condition of the stone and decay far beyond photography. In this picture, we see a picture of the dancing man capital in the Minster, which is decaying through salt damage. Much of the detail is now contained within the salt, and if cleaned, the detail would be removed. Consequently, the image is being scanned so that it may be replicated. This in a 3D printed model for a carver to use to carve a new stone, or alternatively input into a CNC saw to produce a replica. The scan can be used to produce new 3D forms of existing stonework without the need for casting, which Laura showed you in the slide earlier on. And the materials used in casting involves putting ancient stone sculptures and carvings at risk. The scan can also be displayed to the public, and carvings in inaccessible places can be shown to school children and used on the World Wide Web to be viewed all over the world. Whilst if salts occur again, another scan can be made and overlaid onto the original to inform conservators on the decay mechanisms of magnesium sulfates. Just going to take a deep breath again, if you don't mind. Perhaps the most important person we have met is a person named Anthony Clydenberg, which you can see there on the left-hand side. He was from South Wales. And then also the contact with the monks in America, which offers advice on it and how best to input technology. Currently, I and many of my colleagues are learning how to input CNC, which will be installed into the Minster's new technology hub early next year. As part of this process, I've travelled to Anthony in South Wales, where he's tutored me in how to draw and input the Breton CNC saw, getting ready for the Minster's new Centre of Excellence. I've found drawing with CAD is a fascinating creative process which uses language to input the drawing. It is based on numerical commands, which also gives an accurate rendering of three-dimensional space. What fascinates me is how we can use the saw like a mason, taking away waste material efficiently whilst leaving enough stone to authentically finish the stone by hand. In my mind, inputting the saw and using CAD is a creative process which, like the apprentice tradition, will pass on the original design to the next generation. Perhaps more than anything, it's this portal that made me change my mind about technology. The Gothic doorway is not in France or northern Spain, but on the side of a mountain in Wyoming, America. It, apart from the fixing process, is completely designed, input and cut via technology. This by monks, none of whom have been formally trained in the art and craft of masonry. In a reflection of my own story in the Great West Doorway, I wonder what would have been done by if the technology was available 25 years ago. And the question to me is, why would we not give the next generation this technology that is creatively making new stones to reflect those of our ancestors? Oops. You just missed the last slide there. At the beginning of this presentation, I talked about how I trained in the art and craft of stonemasonry and how important passing that experience on to the next generation is. I hope through the story of my life working at the Minster, I've helped you understand what a special place I have worked at and what a special life this place has given me. The Minster is constantly evolving and challenging itself. In the present, it looks out to the world to share its knowledge and experience. In the end, I am a simple stonemason who, through the Minster's commitment to technology, has travelled the world. When you think of the historic timeline, original 14th century masons would not recognise the methods and materials that I use today. He would never in his wildest dream imagine travelling to Asia searching for technology. In turn, I can only imagine what methods the next generations of masons will use to conserve the Minster. The only thing that I'm sure of is the original design will remain. The reflection of the original stone mirrors, which will be passed on to the future through laser scanning, CNC cutting technology, and the arts and craft of stonemasonry. This conserving the meaning of York Minster as a place for past, present, and future generations. That's the end.
We must have some very burning questions for the experts here because, as Amelia and I were talking about, some of these skills have been timeless, and with the pressures that you shared about maintaining a piece of heritage for not just York but for humanity all around the world, how do we better make use of scarce resources to be able to fulfill our mission as custodians?
Yeah.
So, questions on the floor, please. Please introduce your name. So, first, gentleman.
I'm Alton from National Heritage Board, Preservation of Sites and Monuments. We do preserve some monuments in the country. Thank you, Laura and Lee, for the sharing. Very insightful. Noting that York Minster is a Grade 1 listed building, does Historic England provide any restriction or encouragement, when it comes to adaptation of technology? Is there any guidelines, or do they encourage you to do it, or do they try to restrict adaptation of technology?
At the moment, there's obviously a lot of discussion and debate going on, but the architects putting a protocol together, so everything that we do at the Minster has always got, there's SPAB come along, and there's the Cathedral Fabric Commission of England and Wales, which give us permission. It's something that's been thought about deeply, but at present, Oliver, who's the surveyor of the fabrics, putting the protocol together, which is then going to go to the CFCE for approval. But in the whole, obviously what happened with the Queen, most people are very much for it. But yeah, I'd never say that we'd produce a portal like what the monks have done in America. It's something that we've thought about deeply, and I think that's a bit that I'm particularly interested in, is how you can use the technology without moving the creative process. Yeah. So I don't know if that sounds...
Yeah, I think that there's no appetite at all at York Minster to do everything with machine, and that is why they've invested in a brand new workshop for the masons. And I think that's really supported the masons and overcome some of the fears that they've seen that they aren't going to be replaced by technology. So we will never go past 500,000 of stone, And that decision was made by a mason to actually take it that far. It was open to him. So yeah, whilst we do want to get the most out of it, and we face those challenges, like you said, we also want to make sure that we conserve not only the building but the skills as well, the craft skills as well.
I think the other important thing to say as well is that through this process we've actually analysed a lot of the methods that we do use. You know, it's that thing I was trying to say earlier, that in my mind it's become quite clear that we're actually operating in the 1970s. You know, that we've got saws from that period. In 1900 there were saws introduced to the stone yard, then we went through a similar process in the 70s, and now the fund's doing it again now. So it's like, you know, and sometimes it is, what are you actually conserving? You know, and I think very much it's, you know, it is the art and craft of stonemasonry. That's the most important thing. That's unusual.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think there's this great fear, of course, of the loss of the skill that's embodied in the human and the creative impulse. Mm-hmm. And I would say that part of what we have struggled with, looking at conservation projects in Singapore, we use less of stone, but much more of lime, stucco, and even painting work, right? When some of the original material is so far gone, you have the opportunity to recreate the aesthetic ensemble. Mm-hmm. We really struggle with how far to recognize the creative impulse of the current craftsperson or the artist, and to therefore add on that contemporary layer to a building. In the case of York Minster, how do you, I guess, talk through this subject when, in some cases, where something is so far eroded, do you mind sharing how you think about keeping it as it is, stabilizing it, or let's create a piece of this time?
I think that's very much what went on with the doorway. You know, the one that actually led me into the journey of conservation was actually that Rory Young's new sculpture that was cut in a modern dynamic line, and that was purposely to add another layer for this generation, that it wasn't misleading the viewer, and it wasn't something that was inauthentic. You know, it was, you know, and that whole process, there was about 2 years of discussion went on beforehand at the University of York, various craftspeople. I think the only issue at that point was the carvers and our workshop were not involved in the process. It was basically, the decisions were made, said that we were going to use a new dynamic form and produce a new doorway. At my mind at that point was, you know, Jeff, who was the head carver, who was taught me, wasn't going to produce the new carving. But obviously, through, I went and spent time with Rory, I could understand, you know, that we weren't capable of doing that. You know, it was sculpture, it was the next level. Basically what we do is copying. I think also with the Queen, for me, I think that was a fantastic thing. It's you're adding another layer onto the building. Sometimes the Minster can become quite stuffy and you are just copying and copying, whereas that actually, you know, told the story of Queen Elizabeth, who was a wonderful woman, you know, so important to Britain's history. And we've actually, this generation to me has given something, and it's something, you know, that I think in the future that more of historic buildings should have this layer added to it. Yeah.
So I just wanted to add on that was the one that we cut in the polyurethane first. So there was the medieval grotesque where the head had broken off it, and I said that the stonemason had used the polyurethane replica and built on top of it. So whilst it was completely weathered and you couldn't see features, you could still see the form. And I mean, you speak about this probably in much better ways than I can, but you could still see where there was an arm, you could see the rough shape of the body. And so what it's allowing us to do is to keep the form of the grotesque, the medieval grotesque, but the embellishments are a modern design. And so it's that interplay of the two that I see from an outside perspective that's happening It's not something that's completely redesigned. It's trying to keep that original shape. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, that was the intention. Lewis, who produced that carving, was an apprentice at the time, so he'd never actually modelled a grotesque in his life before. So when we told him that, you're going to do a grotesque, he was like me giving the talk. He was shaking. He's like, how can I do this? So, obviously part of that, the intention, there was a discussion, was that we wanted to keep the medieval outline of the building, but then not take away his creative ability. So, he's encouraged all the time to just look at it, but then not copy, if that makes sense, just to put new features on. And I think it worked quite successfully in the end. Lewis himself admitted that you could then see that there was foreshortening in it, and that's like at the end of the Gothic period, the original grotesque, and there's just some really subtle lines, that I don't think if we'd have just given a block to carve onto, he would have reproduced. So it's this thing of all the time is just constantly thinking of what you're passing on, whilst giving, people, the present generation of craftspeople something, keep saying the word, but just being creative.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience, please? Come on, don't be shy. I was warming up after 2 years of not having lectures in the URA.
Was anybody shocked with anything they saw? No?
Really, no one was shocked?
No? You're the first audience that hasn't. I used to think they wanted to string me up when I showed pictures of big CNC machining centres, be a big gasping sometimes.
I think down here in Asia, we are all, because you are guests from afar, you're experts, we may express our shock separately off the screen, perhaps, yeah. But perhaps, you did share you were brought in literally from the outside to re-look at the whole, our guest, the whole value chain, right?
Yeah.
Could you maybe share a couple of learning points about looking back, right, the whole process? What are some important lessons we must have in mind when we bring new members of on board a team to try to look at things from a different perspective?
Yes, so that's actually an interesting question because like I said, we take on a new apprentice every year, sometimes 2 in a year. And what I saw, I wouldn't put Lee in this camp. Lee is very open-minded and forward-thinking, but some of the masons have only ever worked in a traditional way at the Minster. So for me, coming in was quite surprising and shocking for them, I think. And I also saw over the first few years that I was there, the new apprentices that were coming in were kind of going into the same groove. They were picking people who were very similar, with very similar outlooks and very similar desires for their career, which didn't necessarily match the route that the Minster was going to go in the future and is going in the future. So we've changed the job description. It still includes all the traditional elements of it, but also now we want people who have a desire to travel, and we want people who have a desire to engage with technology. So I think right from the outset, when you're bringing new people in, being very clear with them what the expanse of their role is going to be. I didn't actually say earlier that the apprentices will always do a very traditional 4-year apprenticeship without any involvement of the technology. Unless they're showing some interest in it, we may bring them on board slightly. But they will be using the hand tools, they'll be using the handcraft approach for the first 4 years before they even look at the other elements that are going to come in. So I think that's important. We've gone through a big change process. I think it's huge. And I mean, I'm used to it. I'm a consultant, so I do this in engineering companies. I've worked in accountancy companies, all sorts of different businesses. And it's not about stone, it's about change. And I'm a big believer that you do change with people, not to them. So majority of the visits I've done, I've taken somebody with me. And I can't underestimate. I can't I lost my word. For me to say to a mason, have you looked at this piece of technology? And they'd probably go, I'm not interested in that, maybe. But for me to take them to a place like York Minster, so another cathedral, and them say, we're using this technology, that is really significant way of, I still can't think of the word I wanted to use, but anyway, when they see other people who they recognise in themselves, it makes a massive difference. So, yeah, for like Lee showed you those places that he's visited, and if I'd have gone back and said, oh, I found this basalt that we could use instead of metal for pinning, some people might have engaged, but other people think, oh, that's new, I'm not sure about that. But because another conservatory in another country's using it, it gives them confidence. I didn't say that very well, but I think you got the gist. I still can't think of the word that I wanted to say.
Thanks for highlighting that. That's often we need to see something of ourselves in the other, like to maybe be more comfortable to model the change or to be open to it. I think in Singapore, in the preservation conservation sector, we need much more of this. But I would say our first big challenge is to figure out how to interest younger local people to want to take on this journey of being a custodian of the built heritage that we have. And I think in Southeast Asia and Singapore, perhaps one of our challenge would be that we are handling slightly wider range of materials and traditions than, say, Northern Europe. So that would be an interesting one for us. But I'm always very hopeful. We were just talking before you arrived that Singapore would be very different if it wasn't for Brother McNally settling in Singapore and settling up, planting the seed for our College of the Arts, right? How many decades ago? And back then, as a young person, I would never have thought that there would be a School of the Arts in Singapore. And many of you, I'm sure, would have a family or friends or family who are now open to their daughters and sons taking a path in the arts with no guarantee that there'll be a job in the arts, so to speak, at the end of it. But it is a mindset, it's a training for so many other things. So deep inside me, I am hopeful that one day soon we will also have one apprentice a year for wood, one apprentice a year for plaster, etc., to carry on the mission in Southeast Asia. And it's not just about Singapore, it's the entire region, or it's about the Commonwealth, I would say. Yeah.
I said my background's engineering, so I worked for JCB, Big Yellow Diggers. I was there for 10 years. They sponsored me through university. You don't talk to your competition. You don't go talk to Caterpillar. Everything's secret and hidden. In this world, everybody is open to discussing and sharing ideas and knowledge, and that is the biggest opportunity that you've got. That there are other people who may be a step ahead of you that you can go and ask the questions to and talk to and get ideas from and pull resources together. That is one thing in your sector that is really a gift for you, that in other sectors, when you've got that competition, you don't have that opportunity. You kind of go solo as an organisation. So that's why we want to talk to you.
Wow. No, I mean, we have to learn from each other. I think we all have aspects of experience that are useful, but I think we've definitely learned very much from Lee and Laura from York today, from the UK. And once again, I'm very grateful that we were able to get support of the university, Department of Architecture, Arc Lab, the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, and also the Hamish Oxon Foundation to support. And I am also very hopeful that this will be the beginning of a much longer program of collaboration between the UK, other Commonwealth countries, and Singapore to train this region. I had shared very briefly that at the moment, we've got training centers in the Caribbean, in West Africa, in East Africa soon, and also in India. All that's missing is Southeast Asia. So perhaps with York and with Arc Lab and other partners, we can have a training center in Southeast Asia too. because we are in a perfect position between South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australasia. Yes, Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the new facilities is going to be an opportunity for training. So whereas it's maybe not always realistic for somebody to come here on site, I can certainly see that we could have modules that we could be delivering in York, you know, using the Zoom and all these great opportunities to share knowledge. It doesn't have to physically be close to be able to benefit from it.
But in person is always better. I'm old-fashioned like that, right? So
maybe not when it's this hot, though. And it might be a bit cold for you in England at the moment. It's about 6 degrees.
True. Yeah, this change has been quite hard to manage. I mean, you talk about the different rainfall patterns affecting the stone in York. I think in Singapore, the different rainfall intensities have also affected our buildings, because be it a building from South Asian tradition or East Asian tradition or Southeast Asian tradition in Singapore, they are all facing the issue of increased rainfall. Our rainwater goods cannot cope, and once you have a leak in your roof, that is the beginning of a lot of problems. Yeah. So we have to think collectively how to overcome this. May I ask for any final questions or comments before we close for this evening? Okay. Otherwise, I would like to invite all of you to consider coming to 141 New Road this coming Saturday, because they are having a critique session on site, not at university, which is very far away. And you can register to come see the students and their works, and also look at this wonderful new resource for conservation training in Singapore and Southeast Asia. So, without further ado, let's give a round of applause to our guests from the UK.
Thank you.
Of course, we wish you a wonderful journey ahead into Hong Kong and to Thailand and to India. Thailand will be very, very hot because it is the period of the New Year for the Thais and, of course, the South Asian community. So enjoy yourself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing more of your future events. And at the counter in front, you will notice a series of postcards. They are very pretty, but they are more than just a pretty postcard. They are a card for you to access the ICOMOS Singapore and URA collaboration on conservation skills and approaches, different materials. Please help yourself to some postcards and share with your friends. We would love to hear from you on how to work better. Thank you very much, and see you again.
And my business cards, if anybody wants to take one, please do.
Thank you. Let's get a picture together.